Objective 5, we're going to look at some different ways to consider stock value, and some of them are not accounting measures. In particular, the first one is the market value of stock. So that you can have market value per share, or you can multiply the price per share times the number of shares outstanding, and that'll give you the market cap. So if you're trying to consider total value of stockholders' equity, market capitalization would be comparable to total stockholders' equity. The redemption value, which isn't always available, it's the value when the stock is traded for a set price, and redemption is only available in special circumstances. When it's available, it provides a floor for the stock price. So it's a value at which you could redeem the shares in a contract that had been set in place before. But typically, shares of stock don't have a redemption value. They're most common with preferred shares. So if you have preferred shares, they are more likely but don't necessarily have redemption value. So know about redemption value, but as a practical matter, it's rarely a value that you could consider. Liquidation value. So this is the amount left over if you were to sell all the corporate assets and then pay off the liabilities. And this is a good value to look at in terms of having a floor on the corporation's value. So if you're trying to assess the value of stock and you're considering investing, then one thing you could do is look at its liquidation value, and that would represent a worst case scenario. Okay. And then finally, the one that we've been working on all semester is the book value of stock, which is total stockholders' equity less the book value of any preferred stock. Preferred stock is not common stock, and if you need the value, we'll give it to you. So the book value is used in terms of combining it with book value multiples, and they form a benchmark. So book values are typically considered very conservative. So if the book value of a company is 100, we would expect the market value of a company to be over that. So if book values are greater than market values, the market cap, then there's an indication that something's probably a little hinky in the market. And this is what happened in 2009 with banks, for example. Some of their market values went below their book values. But in industry, in normal conditions, okay, here we go. In industry under normal conditions, we would expect there to be some relatively stable relationship between a book value and a multiple of the market that would enable you to benchmark a market value per share estimate. And here's a little formula just for book value per common share, which would be total stockholders' equity less the book value preferred stock, and divided by the number of common shares outstanding. And why do you do this? Because most people don't buy the whole company. They'll just buy a set number of shares. So you want to understand the value of stock on a per share basis, and which is typically how most analysis is done, is on a per share basis. All right. So if we think about the value of equity relative to the performance of the company, the primary ratio we'll look at is return on equity, which is net income over the average total stockholders' equity. But if you remember your ROA analysis, and we had a DuPont form of it, we have a DuPont analysis of ROE. So you have net income to net sales to average total assets, and now we have average total assets to average common stockholders' equity. So this is a leverage ratio. So essentially, you take ROA and multiply it by leverage, and that gives you ROE, which makes total sense because ROA is capturing the rate at which you're returning for the total enterprise. So if you take into account the effect of this leverage here, then you'll get what's accruing to the percent that's accruing to equity, which is a function of the debt. All right, so we're continuing with ROE, and we have this Garza Incorporated example that we saw with ROA. And the only piece of information we really need to add to this is that the average total stockholders' equity for the year ending 12/31/X3 is $35,000. So this is all the same information from the ROA problem that we saw when we discussed property, plant, and equipment. So it asks again to calculate net profit margin, total asset turnover, ROA, and ROE. So this is the same as before. The net profit margin is, let's see where we got it from, is the 2,000 of net income divided by the 67,000 of net revenue. I hope the scrolling up and down isn't making you seasick or something. And total asset turnover is net sales revenue divided by average total assets. So we got an ROA of 4.71. So the leverage ratio here is total assets over average common stockholders' equity, or average total assets. So here's our leverage ratio right here. And our average total assets come from 42,140 plus 43,000 divided by 2. And the problem told us what average common stockholders' equity was. So if you take 42,570 and divide it by 35,000, which I'm doing right now, and once again I encourage you to do calculations as you watch these videos, is 1.21, or excuse me, 22. Just going to 3 significant digits, 1.22, and we could multiply that times 4.71%, and actually I probably took the 1.21 before. This is 5.75, so equals 5.75%, and I'll tell you that is a low ROE. All right, so this is equity. It's higher risk, and I know the 10-year Treasury bond, 10-year U.S. Treasury bond, is about 2.4% maybe today. It's about 2.4%. And I don't know what the 30-year, which is probably more comparable, is. I don't even want to say, but let's say it's greater than 3%. I don't know what it's trading at today. So 5.75%, that's more of a debt, like corporate bonds are in the let's say 5 to 8% range. So that is a super low ROE. Super low. So how could you increase it? Well, all the things that stand for ROA, increasing ROA, also increase ROE, because you would be increasing the net profit margin, increasing turnover, which would increase ROE. But then the last piece is this leverage ratio, so taking on more debt. So the things that we said before for ROA, these are just exactly copy and paste. They had a lot of selling, general, and administrative expenses, overhead expense. That was large, and each $1,000 cut would increase profit margin 1% and ROA 2.3 percentage points, which is huge. Asset turnover, to increase that one, you could cut current assets. We don't have a lot of information about current liabilities, so we don't know if it's feasible. And the other way to increase it is to eliminate or redeploy underutilized long-term assets. So probably viable, but that's an operational question. So if you're a CEO, you'd say, okay, we got to increase asset turnover. Let's start reviewing our long-term assets. Can we use them better? There's just no way to get them to produce more than we'll sell them off. And then finally, the leverage ratio piece. So this is net profit margin here, turnover here, and leverage ratio here. Clearly, they could take on more debt. Their stockholders' equity is $35,000 out of $42,570. So that leverage ratio of 1.22 is super, super low. And there I am. Okay. The other thing is, we don't have a times interest earned because it's not clear they have any debt whatsoever. But if you take operating income divided by other expenses, that's 5 times. So clearly they have enough, their operation is doing well enough that they could take on more debt. So in this case, I think this is clearly a way to go with this company. I think they could get more debt, and if they took on more debt, their ROE would increase greatly. All right. So that's how DuPont analysis works for ROE. Same thing as ROA. You break down net profit margin, turnover, but now we added the leverage component here. All right, that's the end of chapter 10.